Right now, it feels like you're sitting somewhere real. A room, a chair, a screen in front of you. Solid, certain, unquestionable. But what if none of that is actually there in the way you think it is? Not as a metaphor, not as a clever idea. In a literal sense. Everything you've ever touched, seen, or trusted to be real, your body, this device, even the distant galaxies scattered across space, may not exist as solid, independent things. Instead, they might be something far stranger, something closer to an experience than an objective structure. Science has already started revealing cracks in what we call reality. At the deepest level, matter doesn't behave like things. It behaves like probabilities, like waves, like something that refuses to settle into a single state until it's observed. Pause for a moment and consider this. If the basic building blocks of existence don't have fixed form, what exactly are you interacting with right now? And it doesn't stop there. Your brain, the very tool you rely on to perceive the world, isn't showing you reality as it is. It constructs a version of it, a filtered model, a controlled simulation built for survival, not accuracy. Now think about this. If your senses edit everything, if matter isn't truly solid, if observation seems to shape existence, then where does real actually begin? And more importantly, has it ever existed at all? Because if you follow this far enough, you won't just question the universe, you'll start questioning everything. Look around you, everything appears stable, defined, separate. The wall doesn't melt, the ground doesn't disappear beneath your feet. Objects seem to stay exactly where they are, holding their shape like they've agreed to follow a set of rules. But that stability is not something you're actually seeing. It's something your brain is creating. Light enters your eyes as raw data, just waves, no meaning attached. Those signals travel through your nervous system, and somewhere inside your brain they're turned into color, depth, texture, a full 3D world that feels continuous and real. At no point do you ever experience the world directly. You experience an interpretation. Now ask yourself this. If your brain is the one constructing everything you see, where is the real version of the world? Is it out there or only inside your mind? Because what you call red doesn't exist outside you. The color isn't in the object, it's in your perception. The same goes for sound. Silence fills space until your brain translates vibrations into something meaningful. So what does reality look like without a brain to interpret it? No color, no sound, no texture, just signals with no experience attached. Your brain isn't trying to show you truth. It's trying to keep you alive. It simplifies, it filters, it hides overwhelming complexity and replaces it with something manageable. What you see is a survival interface, not an accurate display. Think of it like a screen. When you open a file on a computer, you see an icon, clean, simple, easy to understand. But that icon is not the file itself. It's a symbol that hides the millions of lines of code underneath. Your perception works the same way. So when you look at the world, you're not seeing what's there. You're seeing what your brain wants you to see. Now take that one step further. If every human brain constructs reality in its own way, are we all experiencing the same world? Or are we each living inside slightly different versions of it, overlapping just enough to function together? And if your entire experience of existence is filtered, edited, and reconstructed, what would be left if that filter disappeared? Would there be a world at all? Or just something incomprehensible, waiting to be turned into reality the moment something observes it? Because once you realize you've never actually seen the world as it is, a new question starts forming. If perception builds reality, then what happens when nothing is there to perceive it? For most of human history, matter seemed simple. Things were either solid or empty, real or not real. A rock was a rock. A tree was a tree. The world was made of stuff you could touch, break, and measure. Then physics started looking closer, and everything stopped making sense. At the smallest scale we can currently observe, the idea of solid matter begins to fall apart. Atoms, the supposed building blocks of everything, are not tiny balls of substance. They are mostly empty space with a nucleus surrounded by probabilities, not fixed paths. Electrons don't orbit like planets. They don't stay in one exact position. Instead, they exist in what scientists call probability clouds, meaning before you observe them, they are not here or there in any normal sense. They are possibilities, not objects. Now think about that carefully. If everything you call solid is made of particles that don't have fixed positions, Then what is solidity actually made of? It's not what it seems. Even stranger, when particles are not being observed, they don't behave like definite things at all. They act like waves of potential outcomes. Only when measured do they collapse into something specific. It's almost as if reality waits for attention before it decides what it is. That idea alone should feel strange, because it suggests that the universe at its core is not a collection of things, but a field of possibilities that only becomes real when interacted with. So what are you touching right now? You think it's a table, a chair, a device in your hand. But what you are actually interacting with is a structured pattern of energy and probability that only appears solid because your senses interpret it that way. Take away the interpretation, and the object disappears into something unrecognizable. Not empty, not full, just undefined. And this raises a difficult question. If everything you consider physical is made of non-physical probabilities, then when did the universe become solid in the first place? Was it always this way and we just never noticed? Or does solid reality only exist because something is constantly observing it into existence? Even time begins to feel less certain here. Particles don't always obey a strict forward direction in the equations. Cause and effect becomes less clean the deeper you go. It starts to feel like reality is less of a structure and more of a negotiation between observation and possibility, which leads to something even harder to ignore. If matter itself is not truly matter, then the foundation of reality is already missing the one thing we assume it must have: physical certainty. And if that certainty was never there, then what exactly are we standing on? Now things become even more crazy, because if particles don't settle into a definite state until they are observed, then observation is no longer passive. It becomes part of the system itself. In other words, watching something doesn't just reveal reality, it appears to influence it. This is one of the strangest ideas in modern physics. At the quantum level, particles exist in multiple possibilities at once. Not because we cannot measure them properly, but because they genuinely do not choose a single state until interaction occurs. So the act of measurement matters, and that leads to a question that feels almost impossible to hold on to for long. What counts as an observer? Is it a human mind, a machine, a camera? Or is anything that interacts with the system enough to force reality into a defined state? Because if observation is what creates certainty, then reality is not fully formed on its own. It depends on interaction to decide what it is. Now extend that idea further. If nothing is fixed until it is observed, then what is happening when nothing is observing it? Does the universe remain in a kind of unresolved condition, a spread of possibilities with no final shape? Or is unobserved reality something we simply cannot comprehend from inside the system? This is where intuition starts to break down. We are used to thinking that the world exists independently of us, like a stage set that continues whether or not anyone is watching. But quantum behavior suggests something far more dependent on interaction. Not that human thought creates reality in a mystical sense, but that reality at its smallest level does not settle into certainty without some form of engagement. Even light behaves differently depending on whether it is being measured. Experiments have shown that particles can act like waves or like solid objects depending on how they are observed. It is not a matter of perspective, it is a matter of interaction changing outcome. So what does that imply? It implies that what is not always fixed. It is conditional. And if reality is conditional at its foundation, then the idea of a single, fully defined universe becomes less secure. Instead, it starts to look like a network of potential outcomes constantly narrowing into one experienced version. Now here's where the thought becomes even more uncomfortable. If observation helps define reality, then the line between observer and observed begins to blur. You're not just looking at the universe. In some sense, the universe you experience is responding to the fact that you are looking. And that creates a loop that is hard to escape mentally. Reality depends on observation, but observation depends on a reality to exist within. Which comes first? And if neither can fully exist without the other, then what exactly is independent? At this point, the idea of a fully formed universe begins to feel less like a certainty and more like a continuous event, happening only in the presence of interaction. But if that is true, then something even stranger follows, because it raises the possibility that reality is not a fixed place at all. It might be something that only becomes real when it is engaged with. If reality depends on observation and matter behaves like probability until it is measured, then we have to confront a difficult possibility. Maybe reality is not a place at all. Maybe it is a process, something that forms, updates, and reshapes itself continuously depending on interaction. This idea sounds abstract at first, but modern science already hints at something close to it. In physics, we don't always describe the universe as a collection of solid objects anymore. We describe it using fields, probabilities, and equations that predict behavior rather than fixed states. In other words, we don't always talk about what things are. We talk about what they do, and that shift changes everything, because if reality is defined by behavior instead of substance, then the universe is less like a finished structure and more like an ongoing computation. Think about how a video game works. When you're not looking at a distant part of the map, the game doesn't fully render it in detail. It exists in a simplified state until you approach it. When you move closer, it updates and becomes detailed only at the point of interaction. Now imagine for a moment that reality works in a similar way. Not literally a game, but a system where detail, structure, and even existence become fully defined only when needed or observed. This is not science claiming the universe is artificial. It is an analogy to help understand something deeper. We never access the full raw structure of reality all at once. We only ever experience a local, interpreted version of it. Even time behaves in a way that supports this strangeness. We only experience the present moment. The past exists as memory, the future exists as prediction, but neither is directly accessible. So even time, something we assume is absolute, is experienced through a mental framework rather than directly observed reality. So what is actually out there? Is there a fully complete universe existing independently, with every detail already fixed? Or is reality something that unfolds in relation to observation, memory, and interaction? At this point, the difference becomes difficult to define, because everything we know about the universe comes through interpretation. We never step outside perception to confirm what is truly there. We only ever compare one perception to another, and that leads to a deeper uncertainty. If reality is always filtered, always interpreted, always partially constructed, then the idea of a single, objective version of existence starts to weaken. What replaces it is not chaos, but something more subtle. A layered system of experience where what is real depends on the level at which it is being observed. From far away, the universe looks smooth and consistent, but at closer inspection, it becomes uncertain, probabilistic, and dependent on interaction. So which version is correct? Or are both correct depending on how closely you are looking? And if reality changes based on the scale of observation, then perhaps what we call the universe is not one thing, but many versions of the same underlying system, collapsing into different forms depending on how it is approached. Which brings us to an even more unsettling question. If reality is constructed through interaction and perception, then what happens when perception itself is questioned? At this point, one question refuses to stay silent. If reality is not fully solid, if matter is probability, if observation helps define what exists, then what exactly is doing the experiencing? Because there is still something here, a sense of awareness, a point of view, a continuous experience that seems to be watching all of this unfold. You don't just see the world, you are aware that you are seeing it. That awareness feels stable, like the one thing that cannot be questioned, but even that certainty becomes strange when examined closely. Neuroscience suggests that what you call self is not a single object inside your head. It is a constantly updated model created by the brain, a narrative stitched together from memory, sensation, and prediction. In simpler terms, the you that feels constant is actually a process, a story your brain keeps generating so experience feels unified. Now combine that with everything before. If the external world is not fully fixed, and if your internal sense of self is also constructed, then you are not a fixed observer standing outside reality. You are part of the same system you are trying to understand. This creates a strange loop. Reality appears to be defined through observation, but observation is happening inside reality, which itself may only exist as it is observed. So where is the foundation? Where does anything begin? The deeper you follow this, the more the distinction between inside and outside starts to blur. The universe stops feeling like something you are in and starts feeling like something you are part of. Not a container, not a stage, but a single continuous process that includes both what is seen and what sees it. And if that is true, then the idea of nothing is real doesn't mean everything is fake. It means reality might not exist in the way we assume at all, not as solid objects, not as fixed rules, but as something more fluid, dependent, and constantly forming. Even the feeling of certainty you have right now, this sense that you're inside a real world, could simply be the brain's best interpretation of a system too complex to fully represent. So the final question is not whether the universe exists. It clearly does in some form of experience. The question becomes something sharper. If reality is always filtered, always constructed, and never fully accessed directly, then what would it even mean for something to be truly real? Because if everything you know is an interpretation, then reality is no longer something you find. It is something that is happening through you, and that brings everything to a quiet but unsettling edge. If there is no fully independent reality outside observation, then what you call the universe might not be a place at all. It might be the act of appearing, a process with no final form. Which leaves one last idea hanging in the silence. If reality is not fixed and the observer is not separate, then what exactly is separating anything from anything else? We can go on, but at the end of the day, everything is a lie. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.